Welcome back to Nourished Inside Out, the space where growth gets real and self-love leads the way. I'm your host, Annetta Walklaw, and before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind you of something powerful. You are worthy, you are enough, and you don't need to wait for permission to love yourself fully. That's exactly why I wrote my book, Blooming with Self-Love, to give you the tools, affirmations, and daily mindset shifts to help you stand in your power and own your story. This book isn't just words on a page, it's a movement. So if you're ready to stop shrinking and start showing up for yourself, grab your copy today with the link in the show notes below, and let's walk this self-love journey together.
When mom and dad are taking care of themselves, when mom and dad can make good choices, when mom and dad can manage their feelings when their kids aren't doing well, the kids are going to be safer. The kids are going to improve. So I've kind of just moved away from working with kids and work more with parents and couples.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Nourished Inside Out. Today I'm here with Nicole Richardson. She is a licensed therapist in Texas who's working in private practice with over 15 years of experience. She's worked with individuals and families in the military, people working to get sober, trauma survivors, and as well as parents who are struggling to be the parents they want to be. She's certified in EDMR and Gottman Level 3. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole.
Thank you. Hi. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yes. So do you mind taking us a little bit on your journey and what inspired you to be a therapist and how this fulfills you and what you do in your career work?
So I took a little bit of a circuitous route. My favorite grandfather was a judge. And so I grew up thinking that lawyers helped people, which most people find humorous. And so I planned on going to law school. I was going to specialize in family law. That was my plan. And serve families that way. And then in undergrad, my junior year, I read a book called Choice Theory by William Glasser. And I was like, I don't want to go to law school. I want to do this. And so that changed the trajectory a bit. And yeah, I didn't go to law school. I decided how to do, so Glasser is considered the grandfather of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so that definitely kind of put me down a path of how do I help people that way. And that's the sort of high level Cliff Notes version of how I became a therapist.
What's the support from your families then? Because you're saying that you come from a family who has lawyers. Were they supportive about you going a different path, or were they kind of still pushing you to go down the law route?
It was a mixed bag. My grandparents really wanted me to be happy and do what made me happy. My folks were not as keen on that huge of a shift. That grandfather in particular, it's really funny. I went to visit them one weekend, and we had a really nice dinner, and we had a couple of glasses of wine, and so everybody's kind of relaxed and calm. And then I was like, I have to tell you guys something. I have news, and I don't know how you're going to feel about it. And I remember my grandfather sitting up very straight. He was very serious. I think he thought I was going to give him some like really awful news. And so I said, oh, I don't want to go to law school. I want to become a therapist. He like let this big like, oh. And then he kind of laughed and said, well, that's good because you're too nice for law school. At which point I was deeply offended. I was like, I'm not that nice. I'm not that nice. I could be mean if I want to. In hindsight, I think he was worried I was going to say I was pregnant or something. I don't know. I never asked him what he thought I was going to say, but it was a huge relief to him. It was not what he was expecting. And then I was offended. What do you mean? I'm not that nice. So, overall, though,
Actually, a positive reaction. He's like, well, you're too nice for this. Well, find something else.
I do not agree, respectfully. I do not agree. I didn't like the reaction, but yeah, after that, that was like that was their big reaction to it. I think he wanted to know that I was, learning about like science and research and stuff like that, and not just like, who's your soulmate? Like, do it feels good. I think he wanted to know I was helping people make good choices and not just giving people excuses to not take good care of themselves. And sometimes taking good care of yourself means making the harder choice. So I think once I convinced him, like, it's not just about feeling good all the time, I think he relaxed a lot. Yeah.
That's awesome. What inspired you to specialize in the fields of therapy that you do?
Um, so all three of my grandfathers are war veterans, and my father was active duty Air Force my whole life. So I was very aware of the stress and trauma that being in the military can cause. And I think that, well, I know that when I started grad school, I had every intention of working with families, with veterans and their families. And so that kind of put two things in front of me, right? Like one was specializing in working with couples and families, and then one was also specializing in trauma. So that was a big driver. And I have worked with veterans a fair amount. I live in Austin, so there's not a huge veteran population here. There's some, but not a huge veteran population. Um, so I definitely have experience with, but that's kind of what set me down the path that way. I never expected to work with chemical dependence. I kind of just fell into that, um, which is another kind of long story, but that was sort of a happy accident. Again, with chemical dependence, there's a lot of trauma. And obviously, couples and families get swept up in addiction as well. What happens to one partner happens to both, right? So those three things really worked very well together. As far as being really committed, dedicated, whatever, feeling having a big heart for parents. When I did contract work with Child Protective Services in Texas and doing supervised visitation in Texas, I saw a lot of good parents or well-meaning parents that just needed more support. And so that made me want to work more specifically with parents, because kids do so much better when their parents are in a good place. And when parents feel like they're making good choices and it's not super, super hard to make a good choice, kids do better. So that's why I started working with parents too. Long answer.
Do you typically, that's beautiful. Do you mainly work with adults or do you work with kids?
I mainly work with adults. I worked with teens for a long time, but I've kind of moved away from that. Um, there's a guy named Mnuchin who did a lot of research on couples and families. And what Mnuchin would say a lot is that, when kids are having a hard time, get mom and dad right. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but if you get mom and dad in a good place, the kids will just get better. Not completely, and that doesn't mean the kids never need additional supports. That's not what I mean. But if the kid on a scale from 0 to 10, if the kid is a 2 and you get mom and dad to a 7 or an 8, the kid will come up to a 4 or a 5. And that, again, doesn't mean the kid doesn't necessarily need, more resources to get to a higher place. But when mom and dad are taking care of themselves, when mom and dad can make good choices, when mom and dad can manage their feelings when their kids aren't doing well, the kids are going to be safer. The kids are going to improve. So I've kind of just moved away from working with kids and work more with parents and couples.
What kind of situations are the parents in? Are they recovering from substance abuse or are they currently going through substance abuse? When do they come to you?
So I do work with people that are in recovery for sure, but not all my clients are struggling with chemical dependence. I work with individuals that don't have kids as well. I love working with people who are struggling with perfectionism too. I find a huge correlation between trauma and perfectionism. And if anybody listening has perfectionism, they are probably going, I don't like what you said, but that's okay. Yes. um, so it really kind of depends on, I'll say that differently. I'm not really worried about what got someone in a state, but when someone's struggling with stress they feel like they can't manage, if they're thinking about harming themselves, if they just know they want their life to be different, whether that's because of chemical dependence or because of trauma or some mishmash of both, that's fine. If they're in Texas, I can work with them. So yeah, not all of my clients are in recovery, but some of them are.
Something that you said that really stood out to me was how trauma and perfectionism can correlate. Can you explain a little bit how those two correlate and how trauma can lead to wanting to be a perfectionist when you grow up?
Well, I don't think anybody says, you know what I'm going to be today. I'm going to be hard on myself. I don't think anybody wakes up and is like, I will be perfect or else. But if we think about what trauma is at its core a moment where you had no power. Your power was taken from you, either because of a natural disaster or circumstance or because someone took it from you, right? You didn't have power. You were not in control. You had no autonomy in that moment or during that time frame. And so the way that manifests in some people, not everybody, but the way that manifests in some people is they don't feel safe if they don't think they're in control. And so what happens for some people, those people, right? Perfect becomes the only way I can be safe. And it's not a decision. Again, it's not something that you consciously decide. It's this unconscious, I can't, I will be okay when, I will be okay when, I will be okay when. And before you know it, the goalpost has moved so far away from anything that's actually reasonably attainable that perfection is really the only other option.
Yeah, that's interesting because I remember I actually used to live with a person that I was in a relationship with, and I can see how, like, I don't know everything, and you won't know everything about another person. But he would always wake up every day trying to be perfect. But what I didn't realize is that exactly like you said, it was that trauma that was holding him back and trying to make him not show it by trying to look perfect on the outside. Would you say that's kind of like masking?
I think it's a form of masking. I mean, a form of coping, a form of masking. And I think that a lot of stuff in our culture reinforces this idea that perfection is attainable. Um, you and I offline were kind of joking about like filters and stuff. And, we've heard people in the beauty industry, plastic surgeons and such kind of talking about, people are now holding themselves to the standard of like a filtered photo. I want to look in real life the way I do in these filtered photos. But that's not attainable, right? To be human is to be flawed. To be honest is to be something's a little quirky about you, right? And that's really, really hard to manage when in a time where we're being inundated with sort of social media and all this stuff. And I feel like there's some lip service paid to the idea of imperfection, but like, okay, it's very uncommon. I really admire like movie stars and TV stars that will like, hey, this is what I look at without makeup. And this is how many hours it takes and all the thousands of dollars in lighting that it spends to make me look like that thing over there. That's not how I look when I go to the grocery store. I wish more people did that. But it's not. Yes. So sorry, getting back to your question, is it masking? I definitely think it's a form of masking. What I guess maybe why my brain kind of sticks on that word is some people are more conscious of their perfectionism than others. And when I think about the word masking, part of what it means to me is like this idea that like I know what I'm doing. And I don't know if most perfectionists realize that they are engaging in that and putting themselves through that. So yeah, I've definitely met some perfectionists where I was like, oh, you have no idea. I get it. I'm sorry. And you have no idea.
You're like, actually, and you have no idea. But guess what? I'm a therapist, so we can work on it.
Well, it depends, right? If you're my client, heck yeah. If I'm a guest at a dinner party with you, nope, keeping my mouth shut. I'm not saying a word. I'm gonna clock it and then I'm gonna ask for more bread. That's it.
That's a really good point though, is how do you balance being a therapist at work and having a social life outside of work? Because for me, like when I was a hairstylist, if I said anything about working at the salon immediately, even at the dinner table, people want to do a hair consultation. And I'm like, no, like I need to balance that. So how do you balance being a therapist and your personal life?
Well, so for better and for worse, people have one of two reactions to finding out what I do for a living. So one reaction is kind of like that, oh my gosh, help me find my brother a rehab. You're like, nope. No. And then the other one is, I don't want to talk to you. You're crazy, right? I met somebody socially once, and we were having a very nice time and laughing and kind of going back and forth. And then he found out what I do for a living and he freaked out and was like, well, you can give me any test. I'm healthy. I was like, that sounds like a really healthy response. It's been 20 minutes. You had no idea what I did for a living and you were totally okay with me. And now you are terrified of me. So it's a real mixed bag. Some people make it easier on me than some others. I will say I do have a certain amount of anxiety when I'm meeting new people. Depending on how I'm meeting them, I don't want them to be uncomfortable, so then I get uncomfortable. So like I usually, because it's me, I try to make a joke like, but I'm off the clock or something, right? So that they won't feel weird about it. But I probably don't help by being weird about it.
Yeah, well, I think that's also so important is learning how to balance that. Like, good for you for putting those boundaries. Like, listen, like I'm not on the clock right now, so like we can talk about this during work hours, or we can set some time aside and talk about it. And I think that's really important is having that work-life balance because anybody who works in some kind of people industry, then it's so easy to take it with you. And I think that's also something that I struggled with for a while too. You know, I go out with my friends for dinner, go to the bathroom. Girl starts talking to me. What do you do? Oh, I'm a hairstylist. Immediately consultation. I'm like, we're not doing this. I don't want you.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you that the hair looks good on you by mistake, even though I didn't mean it.
Well, it's totally it's tricky. You want to be nice. You don't want to shut people down. I switched gyms about a year and a half ago, and somebody that I used to work out with reached out to me recently and was like, "Hey, I want you to be my therapist," which is a huge compliment. I really appreciate that, but I can't work with her, and so I'm gonna spend some time on my free time, right, helping her find somebody, which I'm happy to do. But it does become this like that takes a certain amount of my time to help her find somebody. And I'm happy to do it, but I can't do it for everybody I meet. So it becomes this tricky thing. And it sometimes I don't think it hurt her feelings. So that hopefully I explained to her why I can't work with her. But I do think sometimes people get their feelings hurt that I won't work with them. Well, but we get along so well. Yeah, we do. And you've seen me in a context that's social. And so now like my boards are very specific about that's not okay. And I don't I don't want to put myself in jeopardy to make somebody else comfortable. Right. If you can be comfortable with me, it's totally possible that I can help you find somebody else you'd be comfortable.
That's really well said. How can you help somebody establish boundaries, whether it's with their work and their personal life? Well, how do you help people establish boundaries?
I think it depends on how bad your boundaries are out of whack. um there's this thing called spheres of influence, right? So the further away, like if you think about your core people, and there's probably only like two or three people in like the absolute inner circle. And you would do anything for them, they would do anything for you. It's usually a very, very short list, 2, maybe 4 people, right? You would drop anything for them and you have confidence that they would do the same thing for you. The boundaries for those people, for that tiny group, right, are radically different than a stranger that you see walking down the street. Now, that doesn't mean that, like, if you see a stranger, I was at a restaurant a couple weeks ago and somebody that worked there, she fell down. I got up, I went over to help her. I've never seen this woman before. I may never see that woman again. It doesn't mean I don't care about her, but I'm not going to go back to work the next day with flowers and be like, I hope you're okay. Like, I don't know her name. I'm sure she's fine, right? I did what I could in the moment, but she's a stranger. She's going to go back to being a stranger. So the boundaries should be and are different for me and that woman, right? I don't even know if she saw my face because she wasn't feeling very good. So me and that woman have one set of boundaries, right? And the people in my inner circle have a radically different set of boundaries. And so I think one of the first steps when you're learning about boundaries is figuring out, okay, who goes where? Because I can't treat everybody like they're in my inner circle. I can't invest in everybody like they're in my inner circle, and I can't expect that kind of investment from everybody. So I think kind of step 1 is going, what are boundaries? Who do I need? Who's investing in me? Who do I need to invest in? And how are the boundaries different, right? And sometimes there are some gray areas for sure. But I think when you're trying to figure out how to have boundaries, step 1 is like, okay, am I giving energy to people and or expecting energy from people that isn't owed? Is it an inappropriate expectation? So I think that's step 1. And then a lot of people skip the step of figuring out what it is they want from a particular situation. And it's a really important step. So I think, like, after I figured out where people kind of go in that sort of sphere of influence, then I have to figure out, well, what is it that I want? Do I need people to be supportive? Am I not getting that? Do I need people to challenge me a little bit more? Am I not getting that? What is it that I actually need? And then how do I ask for that? So I think there's a lot of steps. And some people, I guess, have a better grip on some of those than others. I don't know if that made any sense, if that was too vague.
No, it did. And I really like what you said earlier was setting boundaries with people based on, are they adding value to me and am I adding value to them? And that's when you can determine who you're going to set boundaries with, because if this person is not adding value to my life, then I don't need to give them as much attention as I think I need to, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really healthy place to start, is being aware on what the exchange is. Is it beneficial or not? So I really like how you said that.
And I think sometimes too, we expect things from people that they wouldn't know that we're expecting, right? Like I might be expecting a level of commitment or energy or investment from someone who has no idea that I'm expecting that from them. And that's something we have to kind of check within ourselves.
That's actually a really, really valid point. I like the point that you just brought up, because a lot of times we will do things for people with the expectation that they're going to do good things back to us. And that's not always the case. So how can somebody learn to communicate what they want, what they need, and what they expect?
Well, you have to be able to articulate it with yourself first. If you can't articulate it to and for yourself first, then there's no way in heck that you're going to be able to explain it to another person. So that's a big part of it, 1. 2, we have to know who we're dealing with. So I wouldn't go to an ice cream shop and order a steak. That'd be weird. They don't have it. It's an ice cream shop, right? So there are going to be people that we have to understand, like, they don't have that to give. And maybe they don't have it to give today, or maybe they've never had that to give. And there has to be a level of acceptance. And it's not that it's unreasonable for you to want that thing, right? Let's use a parent maybe who's not been active in your life, maybe ever, right? and you have a relationship with them, but they're constantly falling short. Is it because you've never asked them for what you want? Or is it because you're ordering steak at an ice cream shop? Because this person doesn't have that, whatever it is that you want and need, which is totally reasonable, but they just don't have it to give. Whether that's attention or commitment or support, whatever, there are just people that can't give that to us. And through no fault of yours. And maybe just because that's the way they're built. And that doesn't mean that people can't change, but we do have to be reasonable about, if that person just can't give me steak because it's an ice cream shop, then I have to adjust my expectations, because I'm never going to get it. And every time I go to the ice cream shop and demand a steak, I'm going to be upset. And that's not fair to them, and it's not fair to me.
Yeah, I like how you said it depends who the person is and what the situation is. Because a lot of times I think when we're in relationships, from my personal experience, I've learned that we're not asking too much in relationships. We're just asking the wrong person. And that was like a total game changer for me when I understood that, is you're not asking for a lot by asking someone to throw the garbage out. You're not asking a lot from somebody if you're asking them to go run to the grocery store and get you something while you're cooking. You were just asking the wrong person. And I think once we understand that, it definitely helps us to take things less personal as well and have less of an expectation. Because there are people who are willing to give, and there are people who are willing to help you and do things for you, but it just may not always be the right person at that time.
I totally agree. I think that's one of the things that we don't do a great job with, like, and this is hard to teach people when we're teaching somebody how to date. What you want, great, want that all day long, right? But what's really hard when you meet somebody, you don't know if they can do it or not. You've got this list in your mind, or this ideal version of a partner in your mind, which, great. I'm glad you have articulated that for yourself. Beautiful. What a great start. But when you meet somebody, you have no idea if they are that person. And I think a lot of times, one of the things that we do wrong in romantic relationships, and sometimes friendships too, is we go in thinking, well, you've got some of these, so you must have all of them. And then I'm upset when you don't have all of them. But you never had all of them. I just didn't know it. And I maybe wasn't patient enough or curious enough to find out if you have.
How can somebody learn to spot more, like, because for me personally, like in relationships in the past, communication was a really hard thing. So a lot of times when we're dating, or even with friendships, like you said, we're looking for value that we can add and they can add to us as people that we want to keep around for the long term. But how can we start to communicate our values and our wants and our needs to people if we're not used to it?
Oh gosh, that's really, really difficult. I heard this study a while ago, and I'm going to get all the numbers wrong, but it was kind of talking about, like, when you become an adult, how many hours it takes to turn somebody from, like, an acquaintance to a friend. And it was something like 1,000 hours or something. It was a big number. And part of me was like, that's a wildly big number. And then the other part of me was like, well, that kind of makes sense though, because we meet people all the time, and something has to happen to convert them from, oh, that's a nice stranger, or that's a neat lady I met one time, to somebody that I'm going to, like, text on a Wednesday for no reason. Hey girl, what you doing? Right? Or, hey buddy, want to go watch this movie with me? There's got to be something that kind of converts. And what the study was kind of suggesting was that there's a certain amount of time that helps convert. Now, with romantic relationships, I think an important or interesting difference is, especially when we maybe introduce intimacy really early, we can substitute communication for physical intimacy. And we get a lot of dopamine and a lot of oxytocin, and that can confuse things a lot too. So it can make us afraid to bring up our values when, man, I really want this to work with this person because I really, really like this person, it can make it scary. Like, let's say you are absolutely crystal clear you do not want children, as an example. And maybe you've been going out with somebody for about a month and it just hasn't organically come up yet. And you don't know how the other person feels yet. You might be nervous to bring up the kid thing because what if that person feels completely different than you? That could end the relationship. And that's terrifying at that point, right? Because you're vulnerable. And most of us are really nervous about communicating values. Excuse me. So I don't want to say that it's easy. I think it takes a little practice and a little finesse because every relationship's different. I generally tell people don't try to go too heavy in the paint with value talk on date one. I kind of feel like date one is about, would I ever kiss you? Do I want to do this again? Am I having a good time? Like that's what date one is for. I think on date three, you can start gently bringing up values. Well, if you don't want this, I don't. Like, okay, that's it. You don't need to go, you don't need to come in that hot. But I would say as early-ish as you can to start kind of like asking open-ended questions. Well, family is really important to me. What's it been like for you and your family? Or like you live far away from your family right now. Do you think it'll always be like that? You can start to ask questions that can start to drive the conversation in that direction organically without having to be like, well, if you're not family oriented, this just won't work. Okay. Right. So I think there's slow ways you can do it, but I would say as early as the third date, start asking questions that start to give you a window into what that person wants. And you were asking about values. What if you ask them about, well, don't ask about previous relationships because goodness knows what they've learned or haven't learned since their last relationship. But what if you asked, in your ideal relationship, what does partnership look like? In your ideal relationship, what's a date look like? In your ideal relationship, blah, 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 blah. Insert what's important to you. And just let them answer. See where the conversation goes.
I think that's a really valid point. I like how you phrased it if by asking the person you're on a date with, what is your ideal relationship? What is your ideal, whatever the question is? I really like how you phrase that instead of putting the pressure directly on them by saying, this is what I like, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. Say, hey, just you can be casual about it. Say, what's your ideal situation for this topic?
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, and two, there's less judgment in it, right? Where if I say, well, my ideal situation is I'm living no less or no more than an hour away from my family. There's an implied, or it can be if somebody's sensitive about it, right? It can feel like a little bit of a judgment if I'm like, well, my goal ultimately is to be completely location neutral, and then I can travel the world with my partner. I want an adventure buddy where we can live and be anywhere at any given time. That's not a bad way to be in the world, right? Those two people might not be compatible with each other, but you can also feel sort of like judged from somebody who's like, well, I would never live more than an hour from my family. Well, okay. Ouch. What's your ideal scenario kind of helps open the door a little more gently, a little more open-ended. And what if the person surprises you with something that had never occurred to you, that was not a possibility for you, but sounds really, really awesome and something you'd be down to try? You never know.
When would you recommend for somebody to start going to therapy, whether they're single or in a relationship? So I think a lot of times it's looked at as couples go to therapy when they've hit a couple bumps in the road. Would you recommend them to go to therapy before they hit those bumps in the road?
Yes. I mean, look, it's my uncle jokes about like, anytime you're a hammer, you look around and you see nails everywhere. So I'm obviously somebody that's going to tell you like, get therapy all the time. Just have a therapist. So I'm biased and I know that. The statistics, though, specifically around couples, are that couples wait 6 years into a marital crisis before they seek therapy, which is wild. So I've had couples that have been in not an awesome place for 20 years, and then I'm immediately on the back foot, like this is gonna be a challenge. So I definitely recommend people, and look, therapy is not the only way. I obviously am a big fan of therapy, but there's, books that people can read together. Like I love Seven Principles for Making Your Marriage Work, which you don't have to be married to read. It's really it's written by John Gottman, Dr. John Gottman. And he even says he wishes he could change the title, just making a relationship, Seven Principles for Making a Relationship Work, because it is about communication. And it's kind of got like a workbook style to it. So it's very approachable. It's a very easy read. There's all sorts of things that you can do for the health of your relationship before it's not in a good place. Other than going to therapy. Again, obviously, I think therapy is a great solution. But there's seminars, there's books you can read, there's I haven't found any good games, but I'm sure there's something. And I think anytime you're intentional about it. So I have a puppy, he's 3. And no less than, I do little training moments with him every day, but no less than once a week, I will like consciously do a training session with him because his health is important to me. Our relationship is important to me. I want him to not drive me nuts. So we do training in part so that we can have that kind of relationship. But that's me putting energy into something that I'm intentional about. And I would say do the same thing with anything else that matters to you, whether it's your job, whether it's your health, whether it's your relationship. Be intentional about it. Don't wait until it's a problem and then throw tons of resources at it until it gets better. It would be, well, not that, yeah, everybody does that sometimes, including myself. But ideally, if it matters to you, you dedicate time to that regularly. Don't let it get to a place where the train has completely come off the tracks, because then it's really hard to get it back on the tracks. Where if you said, all right, every week we're going to have like a State of the Union, we're going to check in, whether it's good or bad or in between, we're going to check in. Hey, how's our relationship going this week? I really liked when you did this, and I thought my head was going to explode when you did that. Let's talk. If you are that intentional about it, I'm not going to say like your relationship will always be perfect, because that's not true. But it's much harder for you to get that far off course when you're being that intentional about things.
Like that. I like that advice. I'm like trying not to laugh though, because I'm seeing exactly what you said, but in a different example. Like, I'm not a therapist, but I'm thinking about it from a hairstylist perspective, because people ask, oh, when should you use dry shampoo? So I'm sorry, but I'm going to relate what you just said to dry shampoo.
Great. Yeah.
Because people always say, like, when should I use dry shampoo? And I recommend use it while your hair is clean. And I say that because it gives the dry shampoo an opportunity to start working right away, versus when your hair is already oily and dirty, then you put the dry shampoo in and it has so many layers to fight through. And that's also the same thing of going to therapy before you actually have those bumps in the road.
Yes. Yes. Dry shampoo and therapy are the same thing. Yes. Same. Yes. That's exactly right. Yes.
Two different backgrounds, same message.
Same. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally the same thing. No, you're right.
Get some laughs out, it's fine.
It's totally fine. Yeah. I feel like I've learned something, because this is clearly what I'm doing wrong with my dry shampoo.
And these,
Obviously.
it's like therapy. Go before you get the bumps in the road. Go before you get the oil in your hair. Put the
Understood. Understood. This makes so much sense. Yeah. And no one's ever told me that before. I thought you were just supposed to wait till it looked crusty, but no. You got to do it after. So, yeah. Okay. I won't ask you a ton of questions about my hair now, but
No, but but that's all honestly how it is too with therapy from most people's perspectives. And it was my perspective once upon a time too. When I was having issues with my ex, we didn't even consider therapy until we already had those issues. So I think also nobody taught us how to date. Nobody taught us how to be in a relationship. And we kind of go into it blindly thinking we know what we're doing. But the reality is we really don't. So I think therapy at any point is very valid, but the sooner the better as well.
absolutely. Well, and I mean, at the risk of sounding like overly stoic, all of life is an experiment. So we go into every situation. We have no idea how it's going to turn out. We have no idea how the other person's going to take something we have to say. We have no idea how it's going to feel for us. And so whether it's a relationship or a job or getting a pet, right? I don't know how it's going to turn out. So we think we know how it's going to turn out. We definitely know how we want it to turn out. And so sometimes we can be blind to I went blonde once. I thought that was going to turn out really, really well. I bet you know it didn't. We think we know how everything's going to turn out, and it doesn't always go that way. And that doesn't mean that we made a terrible decision or that there's something wrong with us. We have to give ourselves a certain amount of like patience and compassion because that's just kind of like what life is. You just try it out and then maybe it works, maybe it didn't.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, Nicole, before we go ahead and wrap things up, is there any last piece of advice that you'd love to leave with the audience that we haven't covered or that you can think of?
Built an e-course for parents. So if you are a parent who is struggling to talk to their kids about sex and sexuality and their bodies, I made a whole course just for you. It's called The Talk Made Simple, and you can find it at thetalkmadesimple.com.
Amazing. And what does it mean for you to be nourished inside out?
I think it means a feeling of like peace. Like, not that everything's perfect, but that like I feel peaceful inside.
You're content with who you are and having that peace. That's
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So where can people find you and where can they support you and where can they look into your courses or any of your hair?
So thetalkmadesimple.com for that, and then NicoleMRichardson.com for continuing ed, for therapy if you're in Texas, and all that jazz.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'll have all that linked down in the show notes below so people can stay in touch.